Alright everyone, well it's time for the final episode review of the day, which is No Exit. The episode opens in an apartment building. The lights are flickering and scratching is heard on the walls. A girl is on the phone complaining about the flickering lights. She sits down on the couch and notices a drop of black tar-like substance on the coffee table falling from the ceiling. Hearing the scratching becoming louder, she gets up and walks towards the other end of the room. She sees more of the tar substance oozing out of the light switch and flowing like a fountain down the side of the wall. Looking closely into the scroll of the switch, the man's eye pops up and she screams at the top of her lungs. Sam and Dean are outside the roadhouse making a joke about heading for LA to investigate the disappearance of Katie Holmes, who has been kidnapped by an evil cult. However, as they're getting in their car, they are screaming and yelling inside the roadhouse and go inside to see what's wrong. Joe and Ellen are arguing over whether Joe should be allowed to go on a hunt by herself. The phone rings and Ellen goes to answer it. Joe shows Sam and Dean the case on the death of the girl in the Philadelphia apartment 3 days ago. Over the past 80 years, 6 women have disappeared from the same building, all young blondes. The murders only occurred once every decade or two, so the cops never eyeballed the pattern. Dean asks if Ash put this case together, and Joe says she did it herself. Ellen tells the boys to take the case and says to Joe, "Joanna Beth, this family's lost enough. I won't lose you too. I just won't." The boys take it to the girl's apartment and scan the room with their EMFs. Sam picks up high signals as he pans the scanner over the light switch. He notices the tar-like substance and recognizes it as ectoplasm. Sam says he only seen this stuff once or twice. In order to make it, you have to be a more majorly pissed off spirit. As the boys walk down the hallway, they hear voices and hide behind the corner. However, as the voices get closer, they realize it's Joe, who's followed them here, talking with the building manager about renting the apartment. She tells him that Dean is her boyfriend and they need a fresh start and they want to rent the apartment. Dean decides to go along with the charade and says he wants the apartment. Joe opens her purse, hands the manager a roll of bills in exchange for the key. Sam and Dean are loading up their weapons and Dean asks Joe if her mother knows she's here. Joe says that she left a note saying she was in Vegas and that she asked to lay a credit card trail all the way to the casinos. Dean's phone rings. It's Ellen, wanting to know if Joe's with them. Dean's prepared to spill the beans, but covers for Joe and says that he hasn't seen her. Going over the building's history, Joe informs him that this building was originally built in 1924 as a warehouse and then turned into an apartment complex a few years ago. Before that, there was nothing. There were no violent deaths reported in the past 82 years. Sam thinks it could be a cursed object that brought the spirit along. The Saints scan every area of the building they can get to. Joe says they'll save time by splitting up, but Dean says there's no way he's letting her out of his sight. Dean and Joe scan the first 2 floors and arguing about this hunt. Joe says that using herself as bait would be the quickest way to catch a spirit. Dean chuckles in his throat, saying, "I'm so regretting this." At that moment, Joe confronts Dean about his attitude towards her and that she's tired of his chauvinist crap, thinking women can't do the job. Dean says women can do the job, but amateurs can't and that she has no experience. Studying Ellen, Dean tells Joe that she's got options, that only the right mind chooses this job, and that she should be grateful to have a mother who cares for her and wants more for her. They continue walking down the hall. Joe stops at the turn corner, scanning the halls. The camera pans down at the event and we see gray gushy fingers extending out. Joe turns around suddenly and the fingers disappear. Dean says the smell that he recognizes, but he can't put a name to it. Joe picks up high signals as she scans the vent. Dean unscrews the vent and reaches in hoping to find something and manages to pull out a lock of blonde hair still attached to the scalp. Teresa walks to the apartment later that evening, reading a letter in the mail. Drops of ectoplasm fall from the ceiling. The lights are flickering and she looks up at the ceiling and sees the wall shredding open. She rushes to the phone only to get static. She tries the front door, but no luck. Then as she turns around towards the wall, she sees the hand coming out of the vent. It grabs her by the leg and pulls her in. Next morning, Dean is sleeping on the couch and wakes up to the sound of sirens outside. Joe's been awake for some time, reviewing all the information so far, still trailing around the small pocket knife in her hand. Dean takes a large one out of his bag and hands it to her, saying it will work better than that one. She hands him hers, and he reads the inscription on the knife, W.A.H., William Anthony Harvell, her father. Dean apologizes for the mistake and she asks him what's the first thing that comes to his mind when he thinks about his dad. Dean recalls a time when he was 6 and his dad took him targeting for the first time, and he bullseyed every one. Just as she remembers her dad coming home from a hunt each night and happy and how happy she and her mom were to have him home because they were family again. Just as she wants to do this job for him. Sam walks in and reports that another girl, Teresa Ellis, in apartment 2F, disappeared that night. There were cracks all over the walls and ceiling, ectoplasm too. Joe points out in a picture of the area that the building next door was once a prison. She calls Sebastian to get information. He digs up that it was the Myoma Mensing prison, built in 1835 and torn down in 1963. They executed people by hanging them in the empty field next door. As she emails Sam a list of everyone executed, told 157 names. One of the names on the list is Herman Webster Mudgett H.H. Holmes. Sam pulls up information on Holmes. He was executed at the prison on May 7, 1896. The term multi-murderer was used to describe him. He was a murderer because first serial killer before anyone knew what a serial killer was. He confessed to 27 murders. His up with death toll at over 100. His victim flavor of choice was blonde women and used chloroform to kill them, which was Dean smelled in the hallway last night. The cops found human remains and long blocks of blonde hair in his home. Just as they should find the bones, salt and burn them. Seems it's not going to be that easy. His body was buried in town, but it's encased in several tons of concrete. Sir goes that Holmes didn't want anyone mutilating his corpse because that's what he used to do. Sam also points out that Holmes built an apartment building in Chicago, which came to be known as the Murder Castle. The whole place was a death factory. Secret chambers, trapdoors, acid vats, and quick lime pits. He built these chambers inside the walls, locking his victims inside, keeping them alive for days. He would suffocate some and let others starve to death. The three of them break through the drywall and head inside to search for any sign of Teresa. Dean and Joe come across a path too narrow for Dean to get through, but Joe can fit through, so she continues down the path on her own. She follows the path to the north wall and heads down an air duct to the lower level. Looking at the walls, Joe sees more of the ectoplasm seeping through the bricks. Still on the phone, Dean hears her screaming, and a few seconds later, the call cuts off. Dean rushes down to the next floor, hammers in the drywall trying to find her. All he finds is her cell phone. Oh boy. Sam and Dean have been inside the walls. While I searched for Joe, I found no sign of her. Dean's phone rings. It's Ellen, and she's spoiling mad because he lied to her. She asks her where Joe is, and Dean tells her that they'll get her back. You promised. That's not the first time I heard that from him at Winchester. I'm on the next flight out. Sam notices there's a sewer system connected to the building, and they lose no time and head out. Joe wakes up and finds herself trapped in a tight space. She turns her flashlight and sees fingerprints and dried blood on the ceiling. In the next room, Joe sees Teresa and tries to reassure her that Sam and Dean will find them. Holmes walks into the chambers and reaches in Joe's cell and grabs a handful of her hair. It cuts to Sam and Dean finding the hatch to the sewer. Back in the chambers, Holmes whispers how Joe is so beautiful and starts to touch her. Joe manages to grab a knife, which is pure iron, and stabs his hand. Lets out a shot and vanishes. The scene cuts to Dean crawling through the sewers for a moment before getting back to the girls. Teresa asks if Holmes is gone. Joe says she doesn't know. Moments later, Holmes reaches into her cell, knocking her knife away and covering her mouth, trying to suffocate her. At that moment, Sam and Dean burst in the chamber and fire several rounds of rock salt into his stomach. Sam and Dean get both Joe and Teresa out of their cells. Sam gets Teresa out of the sewers, but Dean says they have to use Joe as bait because it's the only thing he can think of at this point. Joe reads to it and sits in the middle of the open chamber, sitting perfectly still. Holmes suddenly appears and Joe inches closer and closer to her. Holmes suddenly appears behind Joe and inches closer and closer to her. As he's hovering directly above her, Dean fires a buckshot into the ceiling, wasting salt that falls to the ground in a perfect ring surrounding the entire chamber, trapping Holmes inside. Dean steals a cement truck and fills up the open hole to the sewer to be sure that Holmes remains down there till all hell freezes over. With Ellen in the car, the four of them drive back to the roadhouse. Everyone is dead silent. You can hear a pin drop. Nobody dares to mess with Ellen. As they ride back, Dean apologizes to Ellen once again for lying to her and says that Joe did well out there, and Dad would be proud. Ellen says that she needs a minute alone with her daughter. Ellen can't believe that she trusted her life to these boys. A few minutes later, Joe storms out of the roadhouse and tells Dean to back off and to leave now. It turns out that John was her dad's partner his last time that John got her dad killed. That's why John never mentioned Ellen to the boys, because he couldn't look her in the eye after what happened. Joe walks off into the distance. So now let's take a look at some continuity surrounding this episode. Ellen Harville previously appeared in Simon Said. Joe Harville previously appeared in Simon Said. This is the first time 4 people have been in Dean's car. And now, finally, let's take a look at some trivia surrounding this episode. This episode gets its name from a John Paul Sartre play, No Exit, in which 3 people are trapped in a small room together in hell, only to discover that they're meant to act as each other's torturers. Loft from Season 2's episode No Exit was transformed into artist Joe Dare's apartment for the episode Crossroad Blues. One of the supposed pictures of Holmes' victims was actually a picture of one of Jack the Ripper's victims, Elizabeth Stride. Some have theorized that H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper were the same person. Dean says Mazel Tov to Joe in response to discovering a hidden vent. Alona Tal, the actress who plays Joe, is Israeli. Dean commandeers a truck to pour cement in the tunnel where he, Sam, and Joe have trapped Holmes' spirit. The real H.H. Holmes, convicted after the murder trial of one of sunk his victims and sentenced to be hanged in 1896, requested that his body be encased in cement in his coffin and that cement be poured into his 10-foot grave. Jared took some time off with this episode to treat his wrist, which was broken during the filming of Bloodlust. The CW's official summary for this episode misspells Alona Tal as Alana Tal. That's a weird mistake to make, but whatever. So overall, I think this episode is pretty darn good, and the fact that, we learn a bit more about the relationship between John and Ellen is kind of interesting, and that it wasn't good for them, so yeah. Anyway, so overall I give No Exit 4 Impalas out of 5. Well, wait till next time as we take the next episode, The Usual Suspects. So, until then, carry on, my wayward sons and daughters.